Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I'm beaming in live from Devonport, Auckland, in New Zealand, from my garage, believe it or not. I've got a couple of friends here with me. The one that's most important, though, is my friend Daniel Holland from Weta. We will get there and talk about him and talk with him soon, but I thought I would start out by introducing who I am. Who's this random guy talking to you, beaming into your living room or your house or your work computer? My name's Arian Hilkemer. Hello. I'm the program coordinator for the Bachelor of Art and Design at Media Design School. And my job is to kind of do a bit of teaching. I also help all the students out understand intimately the ups and downs of learning this lovely craft that we all call art and 3D animation. So I thought I would just quickly go through a quick little overview of our program, just to kind of set the scene and help you to understand some of the terminology me and Daniel and myself might end up talking about. But basically, Media Design School is located in Auckland. Every time I go and catch a ferry and walk along to our wonderful campus in Wynyard Quarter, I like to pretend that I own all the boats, all the multi-million-dollar yachts that I walk past, and then end up in this beautiful building here. So basically, we at the Bachelor of Art and Design, we have a 3-year course that really focuses on the ground up. So working your way through learning how to create art, learning how to conceptualize, do concept work, and really make meaningful images. We now live in this amazing world where things like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and all of that can create some spectacular artwork. If you ask it the right things, you can generate some pretty spectacular things. And now more than ever, it's so important to understand those core concepts and core key things that help to create the design and make aesthetically pleasing artwork, images, and 3D models. So in training through visual effects or 3D animation, we look at things like art studies, photography, how to make 3D models, then how to make 3D models look even cooler than the base materials by adding textures and making it feel realistic. This, believe it or not, is a photorealistic render, which is the process of waiting for pixels to dry, as I tell my old signwriter dad, who told me everything's instant when you do 3D. I said, no, it's not. And then we've also got things like animation, which is basically how we move and how we are able to become puppeteers and puppetry and make believable movements out of the characters that you see and love from likes of Disney, Pixar, and the like. We also, this is an area that's very close to and dear to my heart. This is what I would love to be when I grow up as a visual effects compositor. This is the trajectory that I ended up going into. So I studied at Media Design School and went off and worked in the industry, worked on some short films. The latest production that I jumped off of was Cowboy Bebop, working with the visual effects team, collecting data and the production and the shoot of that. So at Media Design School, one thing that really sets us apart is the fact that we have industry connections. We have industry people teaching the industry tools. We use industry pipelines and workflows as well. So you're not just talking to well-trained professors, you're actually talking to creatives and the people that are on the ground and have spent hours upon hours of meticulously curating content to be really relevant. So when you leave, you're not only someone who can technically do the work, but you're also someone you can have lunch with Oh, and also you can problem solve and work your way through a whole lot of problems and technical issues and do that. So also, you can't do much without some scripting, but don't worry if you're not into scripting. ChatGPT 4 is really, really good at scripting. So if that was a definite like, I'm in ahhing if you should jump into this industry, it's okay. You can now fly a plane. And then we've got at the end of the years, so 3 years. First year is all about the foundations and really understanding the tools. Second year, you can split off into the different components. So you get to choose whether you do animation, whether you do the technical director stuff, and whether you do visual effects and compositing. Regardless, you all come back together for one final hurrah for the third year, create a production, which is filmed by industry professionals with professional gear, with professional actors. In fact, so professional that the latest production that we provided, my daughter was one of the actresses, my 4-year-old daughter, and so she was a part of that, immortalized forever in our productions. But the students take the plates and then go off and really create some pretty spectacular industry standard work that they can then put on their show reel. Then they go off and do a few more high level year 3 researchy stuff, technical term, and then graduate and go off into the industry and do really, really well. So that's a little bit about our course. I know that there are a whole lot of people here who can provide more information and point you in the right direction. Our lovely website that you can see playing behind me, nice and visual stimulating, there is a great source of being able to figure out maybe a work where you want to go and how you want to do it, because we don't just do 3D animation, there's also games and all that stuff, but you're here for us, so we're just going to talk about the Bachelor of Art Design. Great. So along your journey, you're going to find that 3 years is a long amount of time. 3 years can a tool that you're using won't get ripped out from under your feet, but definitely can change and can move. I mean, we've seen it with the rate of change of how different things are going with the generative art. So when I talk about generative art, I mean about Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, how you type in a text prompt and it generates art for you. Is it stealing, or is it just using the global kind of pool of resources? I'll let everyone else decide that. But regardless, it is technology now the same, and you have to learn and figure out how to deal and how to work through the change of that technology. Now, it may just be that something in Maya, which is the program we use, something in Photoshop. I understand that Photoshop's about to get a whole lot of AI integration and filters. And I mean, if anyone's used Photoshop, you'll have used the content aware tools. That's using some form of AI. In fact, AI has been around for a very long time. I've been around for ages, so I'm AI, so there you go. No, but AI has been around for a very long time, and what's changed is the computing power, basically. So the algorithms are fairly similar. The computing power and the rate in which a computer can kind of work, has changed. So the tools change all the time. And my guest that I have organized for you, who I'm really excited to let unleashed into the room and have share his insights with his kind of journey. He's been through quite a lot of change in regards to the digital sculpting tools that he's used. He's had to kind of, we at Media Design School push you more towards a more 3D visual effects pipeline to kind of go off and create movies. However, as you can see by my background, I went in and I did architectural pre-visualization. I forgot that one, as well as on-set visual effects, kind of data wrangling. So you can see that those core skills that we learn and that you gather around yourself, they're very transmutable. You're able to kind of push it into different areas of expertise. So I'll ask a hypothetical question where I'm going to give a second of silence, just pretend I can hear, you know, those kids' TV shows. I'm all about kids' TV shows at the moment. We ask a question here. How many fingers am I holding up? Oh, how many of you guys have heard about 3D printing? Oh, quite a few. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm so used to awkward silences. So anyone who doesn't know, 3D printing is the act of kind of generating a model or creating a model in 3D and then going off to a 3D printer. I have one next to me, but the camera's pretty fixed, so I can't show you. In fact, this little skirt at the bottom of R2 there is 3D printed. All the rest is aluminium for that one. But this is a 3D model that's been printed on my 3D printer. But to 3D print, you have to understand the model inherently. You have to know the limitations of the printer. So basically what the printer does is it goes off and it slices layer by layer and puts down. It's kind of like just a three-dimensional printer. That's why it's called a 3D printer. It's a 3D printer hot glue gun, if you will, and it just spits out a bit of plastic each time. But there are ins and outs to being able to create that kind of a thing. So our guest, Daniel Holland, actually works at Weta. Hang on one sec, I will just stop my screen share and share you. Share, here we go. So here's Daniel's art station. So Daniel is Daniel's a collectible sculptor at Weta Workshop. So the Weta, if you haven't heard of Weta before, they're in Wellington, but what you might not know is there are different factions of Weta. There's Weta Digital, who do all of in fact, Weta Digital is owned by Unity now. And they do all of the movie graphics. They're the ones that do a whole lot of the special effects, so the compositing, all the avatar stuff, everything like that. Now, Weta Workshop creates all of the amazing props and collateral for all of the movies, but they also have a spectacular wing of collectibles. If anyone ever gets a chance to go to Auckland and see the Weta Unleashed experience, I have been very lucky enough to go off and see that, and it's spectacular and stunning. If any of these kind of installations come to you, I highly suggest as a movie buff or aspiring 3D animator, immerse yourself in this sort of stuff, you know. So anyway, Daniel has earned his bread and butter on modeling and sculpting and texturing these characters. So Daniel's workflow we'll find out all about. But here are some of the things that he's worked on. Daniel's ArtStation page is constantly being updated, and this is all the stuff that he's allowed to talk about. He was mentioning in the pre-chat before, if he was to show you guys anything else, it would just be a whole big stack of non-disclosure agreements. So without further ado, I would love to introduce my good friend, Daniel Holland. Hello, Daniel. How are we today?
Hi, Arian. I am great. Thank you very much. Great introduction, and love the cheesiness. That's great.
Perfect. Cool. So I guess I do have a few questions, but I'll kind of just react to what we've got. So just talk me through like who you are, what you do, what makes you happy, what drinks you like, what food you like, whatever.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm a sculptor at Weta Workshop. Sculpting makes me happy. Also, punching a punch bag also makes me very happy. At the end of the day, I love doing some boxing. For what type of food I like, it kind of weird Christianarian, but curries, they're great. um, yeah, just and funny enough, it's like sculpting is kind of like a happy place for me. So it's like a nice sort of Zen retreat, right until we get into the technical stuff that comes with work, which we'll probably most likely talk about later. Then it can kind of feel like a brick wall is up against your face, and you have to like subtly maneuver yourself around the maze.
So what do you actually do when, like, what's a normal day look like for you, a normal week or a normal month or a project, if you will?
Okay, good question. So a normal day, boring answer. I turn up to work, shower and dressed, and I sculpt and I do what I'm told to do. But it's probably better sort of. Actually, sometimes there are Nerf gun fights. That's pretty cool. But probably be more beneficial to talk about project by project. So so our projects start with like a piece of concept art or an illustration, or if I'm lucky, a finalized piece of art. Sometimes it may even just be a sketch out of a collectible. And we'll have like a brief that sort of runs down of like how big it needs to be, sort of like the scale, what it needs to do, exactly the timeline, deadlines, budgets, and all that stuff. So the first few days will be sort of like collating references. So a lot of the stuff I've worked on tends to be sort of collect. You won't necessarily see in my portfolio, but a lot of the stuff I have sculpted is Lord of the Rings related. Go figure. Then as we create a Lord of the Rings. So what's really beneficial is we have a huge repository of reference photos of photos taken on set of all the characters, even the minor characters. So it's basically collecting a whole bunch of reference images and also collecting any digital assets that we may have already made from like either previous collectibles or stuff from movies, and see what I can steal, and then start off as like a kit bash kind of thing of taking what I can use from something existing and then building up elsewhere. So once the collection of assets, be it reference or previously generated 3D artwork, there is about 2 weeks of internal panic and internal screaming that I am quietly doing in my cubicle. If anyone has read the book or heard the story, I have no mouth and I must scream. That's kind of how I feel at the beginning of every single project. But then as you start building up, as I start building up the sculpt and things coming together, geometry is getting more and more detailed and looking less low resolution. When it starts to take shape, there's a little period of confidence of like, maybe I'm not so terrible. And so we go through like a series of lots of feedback. What's really cool is we have Richard Taylor, the creative director of Better Workshop. He loves collectibles, so he comes through weekly, gives me the best feedback I've ever received. I've learned so much from him. He's also like a walking thesaurus. He's like, I learn a new word every time I come and see, well, he comes and sees us. So after that, we'll sort of go through noodling, like really fine tuning, sort of really subtle details, to the point where this is me talking, not Weta talking, to the point where I'd say, is it really worth like doing this? Like, it's just I'll do it, but come on. So go through a few weeks of that, which then goes through approvals. It gets signed off. which then we then go into the cutting and keying process, which used to be handled by another team member, but one person left, and now all of the others have to now cut and key their own models so that it can be printed and fit together and pieced together.
So just to give everyone a tiny little bit of context here, the sculpting tool that Daniel's talking about, he's using ZBrush to be able to do that. And for anyone who's done ZBrush will know, anyone who hasn't, it's basically a tool where you can kind of get clay, digital clay, get a whole lot of sculpting tools and different brushes, and then away you go. It's kind of like Photoshop, but you can move around and you can kind of do a lot more with that. Now you mentioned cutting and keying. That sounds kind of interesting. We have keying in 3D, which talks about taking away green screen, but I imagine that's not the same when we're talking about 3D printing. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so that is a very on paper it sounds very simple, but I'm sure you know this. The simpler something sounds, the more trouble it actually ends up being in the long run. So if I were to like move back and sort of like hold my arms out here, if you were to try and print me in one go, the printer will, as I already mentioned, will build up layers. But if it gets to a point where like there's something sticking out, there will be sort of like supports, like geometry will get placed into the model, which is help support the model for printing, so nothing like collapses or causes the print to fail. So in the means of minimizing like those support scaffoldings, because they leave little pit marks which really affect the texture and the sculpt. So we cut the models up so we can orientate the model at specific axes, so we can eliminate as many supports as possible. And we basically need to create a cut and a key, which I can kind of talk about now. So if we were like talking about my sleeve, so this sleeve would have to be like a solid piece of geometry. So if we look in here, like the sleeve itself it's like a thin layer that drapes across. In terms of 3D sculpting, this would be sort of like a big solid object. It'll be and so I would have to essentially cut my arm out and make a male peg, like a square that can fit into like a female hole. So basically my arm should be able to detach or go straight into the socket. So it's sort of like changes a lot of the way you sort of have to work. So in VFX, if you're making clothes, you'd make it as is, like, so this is a t-shirt like that you can take on, put on and off. In terms of 3D sculpting for 3D printing and collectibles, this has to be a solid mass with a concave structure inside to sort of simulate, or to maybe not simulate, to suggest a hollow structure when it's not.
If anyone, it does. If anyone's got any non-expensive Weta collectibles hanging around, you can actually see it yourself, or the heartbreak when your GI Joe action figure loses an arm, you usually can actually see. So what's fascinating about this with me is a new technology, 3D printing, with old ways of making toys, right? So I guess this comes to my first official question, is when it comes to 3D modeling, how do you balance kind of those technical aspects of the craft with the creative and artistic elements? You mentioned you had to have mass and bulk around kind of certain areas to enable to make it feel like it's a one thing print. How do you still maintain that creative ability whilst thinking about the technical stuff?
So that is a very good question. So my process, and I would say this is probably in some cases maybe not the best. There's is I kind of leave the technical side to last, and I focus on the artistry a little bit more. So I will build up um, sort of like the geometry. So in terms of 3D, all models are made up of like tiny squares and triangles, which we call geometry. So I will build up geometry, define the resolution as I need, so subdividing it to make it more dense, and sculpt um, sort of the information I need. But there are some things which, after like one or two, my first two collectibles, I actually know it was even after my first collectible, I realized there are some things where it's just like, oh crap, yeah, I can't do things like the VFX way because that's just not going to work, and it's going to create too many sort of like resin traps. So basically when your 3D printer builds up, it's basically melting resin into a structure. But it can also, but that um, is also like a really hot sort of liquid that dries solid. So you can still get like pools of resin that sort of like sit inside your model, and which then can kind of leak out, which is definitely not desirable. So there are some things to eliminate, like random sort of air pockets in the inside of your model, that if you were to just make that object solid right from the beginning, if we go back to the example of the shirt, so instead of all around the collar and the sleeves, if that's all filled in, then you kind of eliminate by that issue like right from the get-go. So it's kind of it's one of those things where it's just like it's one of those pitfalls that someone will tell you about it, and you're like, yeah, that's fine. I'm not going to run into that, and then you just steamroll into that pitfall.
So
Yeah,
it kind of sounds like you've done a lot of positive kind of reflection and changing your working techniques in order to
it's just every sculpt I do is a challenge. I run into every single pitfall I can and bash my head against it, and but I find a solution around it, and build up my speed
I
as
suppose
well. So
one of my favorite sayings is it's never a failure unless you've failed to learn. It's yeah. So you have to always be learning. If you're learning, then it's not a failure because you've learned how to not do that one again.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
On the subject of learning, I mean, obviously, I've followed your career quite closely. Um, uh, is this where you felt like you belonged? Is this when you were sitting here as a potential student who did go through media design school? Um, is this where you thought you would end up, or are you quite surprised about your trajectory? And what expectations should potential students have when tackling this as a potential career path?
That is an amazing question. So, in all honesty, no, I did not believe I would be a collectible sculptor. Um, so it is like what I wanted to do was always kind of fluid from a kid, where it's just like I wanted to be an artist, then I wanted to be a cartoonist, and then I wanted to be an animator. And I was set on being an animator until when I went to media design school. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a great animator. I'm going to work for Disney and Pixar. Then I tried animation and I sucked. I was the worst. No, I wouldn't say I was the worst in my class in animation. There's a handful that were definitely worse than me, but it was pretty bad. But what I did find was I was really good at modeling, texturing, and lighting, and I really enjoyed those facets. Um, but ultimately, my passion is always towards sort of like characters and creatures. In particular, I just like I'm fascinated by characters. I am that creepy person on the bus that will stare at someone if they have something very interesting. I have creeped out a lot of people. Um, so I know I always wanted to do something with characters. And I initially wanted to go into the sort of like the VFX, the movie industry. But I kind of had the realization for me is like it's much easier to get into the modeling and texturing thing if you were to do like more hard surfacey kind of stuff because there's more of that work kind of thing, and um, there's always going to be a massive amount of competition to get into this industry, but every man, woman, and their dog wants to be sort of like a character thing because that's kind of seen as the glory kind of role. Um, and so I kind of stepped away from the VFX because I saw a more opportunity in the game art side of things to be a character artist. So I was transitioning to the game art side of things, um, sort of like learning how to sort of optimize my polygon limits and texture resolutions and that sort of stuff to make something that is sort of animatable in real time. With and life kind of threw me a bone. I had an opportunity to teach at media design school for a little bit and meet this beautiful man that's in front of you now, Aryan. And so I was like had to get reacquainted with um, sort of like 3D production kind of thing. So um, sort of like principles like which may go over your heads. There's pipeline changes in the VFX that have changed quite a bit since I deviated from it, such as like different types of resolution or bits in an image for displacement maps for comping, different color resolutions and color spaces for rendering, and so there was a lot that I had to catch up on, but I still wanted to get into the game outside of things. But someone sent me a job link to for like the Weather Workshop collectible sculptor. I was like, I'm not going to get it, but I'll apply anyway. Biggest piece of life advice I'll give you and anyone is if you don't feel like you're qualified for a job, just apply for it anyway. There's only two options. You either apply for it, you don't get it, or you apply for it and you get it. So just take that confidence with you. I managed
it also gives you a great opportunity to get feedback as well, doesn't it? So
yeah.
definitely I agree with that sentiment.
Thanks. Yeah. There's also a third opportunity. Third option as well is like you don't apply for the job and you definitely won't get the job. So might as well make it a 50-50, right? So I just chucked my CV and not expecting anything, and yeah, I got called up and they wanted to give me an interview, and I managed to get the job. So I was fully expecting and preparing to just either stay the course at media design school or the VFX route, or try to transition fully into the game art side of things. So yeah, the collectibles thing, yeah, it kind of threw me for a loop. I never saw myself sculpting them.
I think being open and available for things. So I mean, you haven't stepped backwards or up or down. You've really just gone forwards because there's no one saying that it's generally thought that you're a 3D artist, so you do games, you do so it's always being open for that technology.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a lot of this stuff is very interchangeable. It's just the restrictions and limitations of the medium that sort of will change, but the principles of, for instance, my areas of expertise, modeling, lighting, texturing, it's all interchangeable.
Do you feel that some of the restraints of having to model for a 3D printed object, it sets your vision. Obviously, you've got a vision of the concept art and then the vision of the art director, but obviously you're trying to push your own kind of not agenda, but definitely art style and hide it there somewhere. No doubt that's a thing. But do you ever find that those restrictions help you, or do you find that they limit you? You limit your creativity?
Um, those are very, very good questions. So, trying to think. It's different. I wouldn't necessarily say it's limiting in the sense that it kind of depends on what sort of drives you as an artist or as a technical artist. For me personally, I am just speaking for myself, found it a little bit more limiting because it was like Geralt, you sculpt Geralt, this is Geralt, you do Geralt. There's like how many studs does he have on his armor? Like you match those, kind of thing. Where I kind of, if you've seen my art station, it's just like I like doing kind of like toony stuff. I also like doing monsters. I can't. So personal work is always sort of like free. Where at work, I kind of get slammed a little bit hard. Whereas like I do try to sneak a little bit of flair or something in, or I haven't necessarily paid too closely attention to how minute of like a piece of detail work is or something like that, and I get slapped on the wrist because we have to make it as 100% accurate as possible. Which for me personally, I'm kind of like a big picture guy. It's just like it looks cool. That's cool. I was like, yeah, it's cool, but you missed this one button. So it really depends on the personality type. There are lots of people who sort of thrive in that sort of like real hyper fixated, detail orientated thing. I just want to make cool stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about concept art that's given to you and stuff. With the likes of the generative AI and all that, is there any kind of, how's Weta, or how are you, or what's your feel on the way that your industry and, well, you're around the movie industry as well, so I can ask you that as well, is reacting to the generative arts sort of debate? We don't have to go too deep in the
it's fascinating. It's certainly an interesting thing because there's a lot of panic around people who are just saying, "Oh my god, that's it!" Like, concept art's over. Like, my job's dead, or worrying about in 5 years with like how exponential the growth of AI is. It's just like whether they would have sort of like job security. I kind of err on the side of this is really cool. There's some really cool stuff that's done with it. And there's also a part of me is just like, it's like curious and maybe a little bit apprehensive of like how much fun is this going to take from my job in the future, kind of thing. It's just like, it's AI is a fantastic tool, and we've already since my days as being a student of like being back in 2010 2011, we've seen 3D programs and applications that we use get better and better and better and more efficient, so that like entry level to doing CGI or 3D artwork, and even to an extent like digital artwork and digital painting, like the entry level is getting smaller and smaller, which I think is really cool because it allows people who may not necessarily have a certain set of skills to like refine a concept, but they might be able to model it where they can use an AI to fill in a gap in their knowledge or a gap in their skill set, so then they can take something to the next round. I think it's really cool, but again, for me personally, I like making cool stuff. I don't like saying I'm an artist because that kind of feels a bit pretentious, but I am also aware of like it could potentially eliminate a lot of the artwork in the future, which then means job descriptions are going to change into potentially into a more technical kind of role, which I would
Well,
say is
I know in particular Weta Digital's calling out for screaming out for motion capture data
mm,
analysts. They're not even motion capture artists anymore, it's data analysts, right? So
yeah,
so yeah, but that's not to say that, I mean, it's not a scaremongering tactic by any means. I believe personally, I'm monitoring this very closely. It's kind of my thing.
mm,
And I honestly believe that it's just going to elevate us in order to be able to think more. I'm sorry to say, but how many rivets are on Geralt's
yeah,
armor and that,
exactly.
right? So it just allows you not to think. I'll give you an example just real quick before we do open the floor to questions. So if you do have any questions, write it in chat box there, and Sabrina will fire them through to us in here. But there was a stage where when I did my 3D at Media Design School, where I knew intimately how to create a shader network that mimics glass, using real world kind of physics and kind of how areas of indexes of refraction and scratch maps and all this and that, I knew how to grab different nodes. I'm going to tell you, it was about 10 total different things you had to pick in and do mathematics. And that was my thing. So when I presented my reel, I had beautiful glass and looked amazing. Whereas now I can pretty much teach a first year student on their second day how to make that very same glass shader, but not have to connect things, and by just pressing a button and it's done. Whereas it would have taken me maybe 2 hours to kind of get it right. So what that's doing is it's enabling you as an artist to just think around and think what the next layer of complexity is. A project's always finished, not because you want it to be finished, but because of the deadlines, right?
Yeah,
So
that's actually a really good point. The more that you can speed up a process, which kind of goes back into what I was saying at the beginning of a project, we will take stuff from successful sculpts in the past and reuse them because we already have that asset. Then why the hell not use it? So yeah, anything that will
standing on
speed
the
up.
shoulders of giants,
Yeah.
elevating the
What's
human
the
race.
yeah? What's that book title? Still like an artist.
Yeah, there you go. All right, very good. Well, so that's kind of all the questions that I had. Does anyone online, I understand that there's quite a few of you, want to ask Daniel anything at all? He's already shared what food he likes. Maybe you want to see what curry he likes too, like what specific curry.
Almost.
Or you could ask what his favorite ZBrush preset brushes, maybe what his favorite Weta model is. While we wait for a question to come through, I'm curious. I've seen some of your amazing work come through. What's the best model that you've worked on, and what's the hardest, not because of that, but because of people?
Okay, so the one I'm the most proud of that I can talk about and show is would be the latest one on my art station, which is the Tavra sculpt from Dark Crystal. I'll keep it real with you. I do not particularly care about Dark Crystal. I'm not a huge fan of the Dark Crystal. However, seeing as Arian's got up, if you just scroll down.
Not right.
As Arian's scrolling through, you can hopefully see how intricate and how hyper detailed the original character is in terms of like the different types of fabric they have, like the little embroidery, the details, the tassels that are holding the armor in place. And this is just a tertiary character. Like the artistry of the Jim Henson's crew is astounding, and in terms of sort of like stuff that I can show, this is like the biggest achievement that I'm like definitely the most proud of. It was a huge challenge. It was like a huge leap of like sort of like sculptural and textural work that I had not done before. So there's I can't be hyper specific on the details, but the ones the sculpt that has sort of almost destroyed me through dealing with people is one that has not been released yet. It's off a very popular video game, and the game studio company has got a really bad reputation with the artists at Workshop of being very hard to work for and hard to work with. Because we would have to go through the game developer company was owned by by a publishing company. So we'd have to go through the publishing company. They would give their little bit, and so we would work on that. Then the feedback would then the screenshots and models will eventually go through to the actual game developer, and they would have their feedback, which was completely different to what the publishers would say. Then there's also the fact that Richard Taylor really did not like the original concept for this collectible, so he wanted to make changes, and he was definitely right in saying what's the point of difference between this sculpt and every other sculpt of this particular character. Completely right to say that, but it's like there's the concept that studio have approved. So it was a battle between as me and my art director were battling against Richard Taylor, a publishing company, and the game developer. Yeah, it was
So
particularly hellish.
I guess you have to learn how to kind of say yes to people, but then kind of sway or push them in a slightly other way.
Well, it's kind of funny because like this type of client was the main reason why I stopped freelancing. It's just like I don't want anything to do with that. However, it was not quite so bad at Weta, because unlike freelancing, I was getting paid for all these iterations and changes. So my money was coming through. I can afford to raise and pay my rent. So it
It's
wasn't quite
always
so bad.
that silver lining. Now,
Yeah, definitely.
so I hope you guys have kind of seen a picture, and we really wanted to look at technology and how that's pushing things. We also wanted to give you a different lens when it came to the industry that we work in. You might be able to pick up from what Daniel's kind of suggesting here is that he absolutely loves it, but there are days, just like there are days in any profession, where you're just like, oh, why this? And that's the thing with this industry. A lot of this industry is always sugar-coated and put out to be this amazing, magical Disney-esque kind of world. But in Disney, there's villains, right? But for the most part, the driving force of keeping you on point and keeping you do well in this is how you work through adversity. One of my favorite things is the geology of precious gems and diamonds. You know, how are they formed? It's under immense pressure, and the right set of circumstances have to come together to create that very unique piece of mineral and that, right?
That's a lot more wholesome than the way I look at it. I was going to say, for me, the way I view it is those YouTube videos, which I'm sure some parents will find horrific, where they throw a baby into a swimming pool and the baby learns to swim naturally. It's like for me,
Yes,
it's
it's
like there's sometimes, especially when you're first starting out, there's kind of like a sink or swim kind of thing. But if you and it definitely gets hard for sure, but just stick with the process of keep turning up, keep learning, keep an open mind about everything, accept feedback, do not have an ego, and just keep working, and you will flourish. There's just like there's no other way. You just keep if you just keep working through the stages, everything turns out fine.
And so you've offered a little bit of advice there, but the age-old ending question: what advice? We obviously have a wide range of different types of people here online today, but specifically for anyone looking to start out, for anyone who is currently in the process of learning all this stuff, what's your main, maybe like 3 or 4 points that you would suggest that they just watch out for, or advice that you would give them to succeed or to be the best they can?
Definitely. So definitely keep an eye on AI at the moment. It's a very new thing that people are playing around with, and it's coming out with some really cool stuff. We There isn't exactly a clear defined path of how that is going to change our industry, but the fact of knowing it's there and doing stuff with it is going to be huge in the future. Whether that'll be like concept art, it may replace photo bashing as a previous tool that artists would do in the studio. Otherwise, the main sort of thing I would say is, if this is sort of like the career that you want to go through, be fluid and don't necessarily have an expectation or a goal of where you would want to end up. Just with like my previous story, I thought I was going to be a fantastic animator, only to discover I was terrible at animation, but I was great at modeling, texturing, and lighting. So enjoy your time studying, because you will cover every facet of this industry as it stands right now. And through that experience, you can then decide, oh, I actually really enjoy this sort of thing. And sort of like, I would say, I won't necessarily want to say you should specialize in a particular kind of thing. Like the more knowledge you have across the board, I think is quite valuable. Like for me, a big struggle that I personally had was like I just wanted to do characters. That's all I wanted to do is characters, characters, characters. So I shoehorned myself in a very super competitive, tight little box that that I think I only really got the job at Weta because like there was a pandemic on and all the borders were closed and they needed new artists. um, so it's just like
That's not why. We all know that's not why, Daniel.
you're too kind. But ultimately, for those of you who are not afraid of the hard path and do find a particular niche that you do enjoy, and that's the only thing you see yourself doing in the future, like myself with characters, then you just have to throw everything you have into that and build up that skill. I would also say, if you are taking going into any form of education, work really well with your peers. There was the number one rule that my teacher told me was don't be a dick. That is a great rule, because basically your peers will help you get jobs. Like my first few ever jobs came through the recommendation of someone else. Um, and if you can strike up a genuine relationship with people in the industry, that will also help you quite a lot. It's very sort of Alabama incestuous like. It's a lot of who you know and connections. So getting that initial step in can be really hard. So keeping on top of your LinkedIn and just find an artist you like and just go, hey, I love you, and just say you love their work and compliment them. But don't go, hey, here's my artwork. What do you think? How did you get? So just be genuine with people as well. So networking is a huge thing, and that was something I personally struggled with. So those would be sort of like my sort of top recommendations.
Perfect. And if you're not used to going up to people or feel a little nervous or anxious about it, start small. Like anything, you've got to learn how to do this. So you'll figure that out. There's fantastic advice and absolutely correct, obviously, or in my opinion, correct. And yeah. Hey, Daniel, thank you so much for your time. You're incredibly generous with your answers, incredibly generous with your time, and incredibly inspirational and inspiring. I can't wait to see what collectibles you're going to come out with next. Unfortunately, you'll never bring my mate out. That's why I'm making him myself, because of IP and all that sort of stuff. But
yeah.
And to everyone online, thank you so much for streaming in, beaming in, and being with us. This is why we do what we do, is to entertain, inspire, and just provide entry points into the spectacular universe of artistry and technical mashup. It's a very exciting space to be in. It's an even more exciting space to be in with the inclusion of generative AI and the ChatGPT stuff. The way our lives work and are. I've never seen a technology be talked about by my grandmother, and by my work peers. I'm having the same conversation the whole way through. So definitely keep your eyes on that. The rest of the journey is up to you. That is our stream for this evening for us, this morning for anyone else anywhere in the world. Thank you very much for spending your time with us. I hope you got everything out of this. We have chucked a link. We have chucked a link on the chat for Daniel's Art Station, if you want to have a look there. And yeah, keep looking, keep working, and that's great. So I will say goodbye. Thank you guys very much, and enjoy your afternoon, evening, or morning.